The wind slid like a knife through the gaps in the cabin's log walls. It found her no matter how tightly she wrapped the wool shawl around her shoulders, no matter how high she banked the fire. The cold out here did not just come from the air. It came from the land itself, from the silence in the trees, from the graves on the hill. Mara stood at the window, her fingers red and raw from chopping wood that morning. The boys were still asleep, bundled together under the old quilts Shed stitched from her mother's clothes. They didn't stir, not even when the wind shook the pane. She had barely eaten yesterday, a half biscuit and weak coffee. Today it would be cornmeal and boiled potatoes, if she could keep the stove going. There was no one to bring her flour now, no one to fix the fence. Her husband had died in the middle of the last snow, slumped against the stall of the milk cow. He was buried beside the infant daughter they'd lost 2 years back, under a stone shed carved herself. They'd come west with hope in their bones. That was gone now, and what remained was endurance. Bitter, stiff-slimmed endurance. She put a kettle on, knowing the water would take longer than usual to boil. The fire was sullen, coughing more smoke than heat. Outside, the snow had thickened again overnight. The path to the barn was gone, and she'd have to shovel it again before the boys woke. Mar pressed her hand flat to the glass. Her breath fogged the pane, and she traced a little line down the middle, a shape like a tree or a crack. She watched the wind pull across the white hills, lifting powder into the air. It looked soft from inside, but she knew better. The kettle didn't whistle. It never had. The spout was bent from when the baby had pulled it down once, scalding her arm. She remembered the scream, the way her husband had frozen, and how afterward he couldn't meet her eyes for days. The door creaked. A boy's footfall, light and slow. "Ma," came Ella's voice, quiet and hoarse. She turned. His face was pale, one cheek swollen where a tooth was coming in wrong. Shed tried with a cloth soaked in liquor, but H.E.D. still cried through the night. She nodded at him, unpoured a half-minus cup of hot water into a tin mug, then added a few drops of honey, what was left of it. He drank with both hands around the mug, shoulders hunched. "You cold?" she asked. He nodded once. "Go wake your brother, then dress warm. We'll do the barn together." His lips twitched, but he didn't speak. She watched him pad back down the hall, small shoulders sloping like an old man's. It was too quiet in this house. In the first year, there had been neighbors, people passing, coming west, trying to settle. Most had moved on. Some buried their dead and never left. She and Thomas had stayed, believing hard work and time could tame anything. Now it was her alone with the boys, and the land didn't seem tamed. It felt like it was watching her, waiting to take back what little lady claimed. She stepped outside. The wind hit her like a slap. Her boots scraped through the crusted snow, and she made the path again with her weight and a shovel. Her fingers stung, then numbed. The cold had its own language, and today it was cruel. By the time she reached the barn, her breath was shallow. She pushed the door open and was greeted by the low, miserable sound of the cow. The animal was hungry and stiff, but alive. She forked the hay with slow, steady movements. Her arm throbbed from where she'd once broken it, falling off the porch healed wrong, never looked at by a doctor. Eli and Samuel joined her, each carrying a bucket of warm water. She gave them tasks without talking much. They moved like small ghosts in thick coats. Then, as she stepped out into the yard, she saw movement beyond the ridge. A figure on horseback, coat flapping in the wind. Not familiar. She stood still, not afraid but wary. The rider came slow, hands up, cautious. The horse snorted, breath steaming. When he stopped a few yards from her, he pulled his scarf down. He was older than she was, but not by much. Beard rough, eye steady. "Mom," he said, "my name's Silas. My wagon broke through the ice about a mile back. Got 2 mules stranded. I was looking for help or a barn." Mara said nothing. The wind answered for her, howling between them. He looked down, then back up. "I don't mean trouble. I just didn't want to leave them out there to die. She studied him, the gun on his saddle, the way his horse was blown and trembling. You alone? She asked. Yes, Mum. A long pause stretched between them. Finally, she said, stall's full, but there's room for one more if you don't mind moving manure. He nodded, eyes not quite meeting hers. You'll get the gate, she said. He walked the horse in with slow steps, glancing now and then at the boys who stood near the barn door, watching with the same hollow quiet they gave everything these days. Silas gave a small nod to them, nothing more. Mara pointed toward the corner stall, half minus rotted boards and straw that smelled more of dust than animal. That's all I can offer. Shall have to share with the cow for now. Silas tied the reins, patted the horse's neck, then bent to scoop out muck without being told. She watched him work. He didn't ask for tools. Found what he needed. Used his hands when he had to. Inside, the boys fed the chickens. Samuel whispered something, and Eli stifled a laugh. It was the first sound like that shed heard in weeks, the smallest crack in the ice. Silas cleared the stall, not once looking at her for approval. When he straightened, he took off his hat, wiping the sweat and cold from his brow. You're welcome to warm by the fire, she said. Not much in the way of comfort, but it's better than out here. He hesitated. It'd be grateful. They walked back to the cabin with only the wind between them. No need for talk. Not yet. She kept him ahead of her, just in case. She had learned to measure men that way, how they moved, how they held silence, what their eyes looked for. Inside, she gave him the chair nearest the stove. He didn't spread out, didn't lean back, just held his hands over the heat and nodded toward the window. Storm's got a bad look to it. She didn't answer. She poured him a bit of weak coffee in the cracked cup Thomas used to drink from. He wrapped his hands around it like it was gold. The boys settled on the floor with their carb minus with animals. They played quietly, casting glances at the stranger but saying nothing. He didn't speak to them either, just watched the fire with tired eyes. After a while, she broke the silence. What were you doing out here alone? Let the question settle. Heading north. My brother's place, or what's left of it. He was sick last year. Thought maybe I could help with the land. You're late for a visit. I'm late for everything these days. The way he said it plain, no drama told Herm, more than any story would have. She sat at the table, resting her hands flat. The skin on her knuckles was cracked open, blood dried in thin lines. She didn't hide them. You can stay until the snow eases, she said, but you'll pull your weight. That's fair. You don't touch the boys. You don't go near the back room. You eat last. He looked her in the eye. Understood. Something in her relaxed, just slightly. Not enough to call it trust, but maybe the edge of it. He took off his coat, hung it near the door. Underneath, his shirt was worn thin and patched, with pieces of different cloth. She noticed the stitch work. Patient. You sew that yourself. He glanced down. Was my mother's hands before mine. Learned to keep the thread straight after she passed. The snow tapped harder at the windows. The wind had shifted east, bitterer than before. She stood and lit the lantern with steady fingers. Silas looked around the cabin. His eyes didn't wander like a man casing a place. They landed on the framed photo near the hearth. Thomas in his uniform, straight minus backed and smiling. Your husband? He asked. She nodded once. HES gone. I'm sorry. No need to be. HES the reason we made it this long. She sat back down and picked up her mending. The boys leaned against each other, half minus asleep, heads nodding like sunflowers in late fall. He didn't speak again. Didn't ask questions. Just stared into the fire like it held something from his past too. She watched the way he held his cup, careful not to make a sound, as if he knew the quiet here'd way to it. Outside, the wind howled louder, but inside the stove burned a little brighter. Subscribe and follow the long road west. The storm penned them in for 2 days. The snow came fast and thick, erasing every path, burying the fence posts, and turning the world outside into a pale, formless blur. They ate little, shared warmth, and said only what was needed. On the third morning, the wind had eased, though the cold still bit hard. Mara was up before light, boiling water to wash clothes. The boys slept curled like pups under the quilts. She moved quiet, mindful of creaking floorboards and the ache in her hip that flared sharp in the cold. Silas stirred near the stove. He'd taken the floor, though she'd offered him a cot. She'd seen him wrap a blanket around himself, like he'd done it on dirt before his back straight, even in sleep. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were simple and clean, like a man used to hard labor and long silences. That morning, after coffee and a crust of bread, he followed her outside without asking. "You don't need to help," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I do," he said. She let it lie. There was too much to do for pride to get in the way. They cleared the barn roof together, side by side on ladders slick with frost. She watched him work, deliberate, unhurried, strong. He didn't try to take over, just moved with her, match for match. When her fingers stiffened too much to hold the spade, he passed her a strip of jerky from his coat pocket, said, "Chew. It helps." She did. It tasted like smoking salt and something old. That afternoon, he fixed the latch on the coop without being asked. She saw him trace the splintered edge with one calloused thumb before fitting it back together with a nail he flattened himself on a stone. That evening, the boys sat close to him by the fire, not speaking but not afraid either. Silas carved a horse from a scrap of pine and handed it to Samuel without a word. The boy ran his thumb over the grooves for 10 minutes, like it was gold. Later, when the boys had gone to bed, Mara stood washing the tin cups in cold water. "You good with wood?" she said. Silas shrugged. "My father was a cooper. Taught me some before I left home." "Where's home?" "Used to be Missouri. Not sure what it is now." She nodded. That was the way of things out here. People unrooted, drifting, holding only what they could carry or carve. She dried her hands. "You plan on moving on soon?" "I don't know. Depends what the weather does. What the mules decide." The quiet stretched out. Not uncomfortable, just full of things unsaid. She looked at him, really looked, his rough beard, the scar that curved through one eyebrow, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her boys. "You lost someone?" she asked. His jaw worked for a second before he answered. "Wife. For winter's back. Then the child. Fever. Took them both." She exhaled slow. "That's a hard thing," she said. He nodded. "Still is." Outside, the moon hung low and yellow over the snowfield, casting long shadows across the yard. Inside, the fire cracked and snapped. She wrapped a shawl over her shoulders, bones sore and tired. "You can stay," she said, "if you're willing to help through spring." He didn't speak right away. "Then it'd like that." She looked down at her hands, scarred, red, strong. "I don't offer charity, and I don't expect it." They stood there a while, two quiet figures in the soft firelight, not touching, not needing to. Later, as she tucked the boys in, Eli whispered, "Is he staying?" "I think so," she said. "Good," Eli murmured, then rolled over. She stood for a long time by their bedside, watching them breathe. The house didn't feel so hollow. Not tonight. By the end of that week, the ice had melted just enough to hear water running under the snow. Not a thaw, no, it was still too cold for that, but a promise of one, far off. The kind of sound that reminded you spring hadn't forgotten you. Mara noticed Silas talking more with the boys. Quiet words while they worked, names of tools, old tricks for starting fire with wet kindling, ways to track animals by the way snow broke under their hooves. Samuel listened with big eyes, and Eli asked questions, sharp and fast. She didn't stop them. She just watched. One morning, Silas caught her trying to lift the flour sack onto the shelf with one hand. Her shoulder had flared again, a white minus hot flash that left her breathless. He moved behind her without a word, took the sack, and set it down. His hand hovered near her elbow for a beat too long. She didn't look at him, but she didn't move away either. That night they ate boiled beans and a sliver of dried venison. She passed the last heel of cornbread to Eli. Silas didn't touch his portion until the boys were done. "You sure you're eating enough?" she asked him low, after the boys had gone to bed. "I've gone longer on less. That ain't what I asked." He looked up at her with tired eyes. "You'll be fine." She didn't press it. Still, when she stirred the beans the next day, she added a few extra roots she'd been saving. Later, they walked the trap line together. Snow still clung to the trees, but the sky had turned a deeper blue brighter, as if testing its strength. Mara walked ahead, boots breaking through soft spots. Silas carried the empty sack and kept pace beside her without talking. They found 3 rabbits to cut clean, one ruined where something else had gotten to it first. She knelt and studied the tracks. Silas crouched beside her. "Coyote," he said. She nodded. "They come closer this time of year." "Hungry." He looked toward the ridge. "You ever shoot one?" "Once. Got lucky." "You any good with a rifle?" "Good enough." He didn't smile, just nodded like that told him everything he needed to know. When she stood, he took the sack without her having to say a word. As they headed back, her boots slid on a patch of ice. Silas grabbed her arm, just enough to steady her. She pulled free once she had her footing, brushing off snow. Fine." He didn't apologize, just waited until she started walking again. That evening he fixed the stovepipe where it had begun to leak smoke. She stood beside him, holding the lantern while he worked. When he stepped down from the chair, their eyes met close, the heat of the stove behind them. She saw the scar again, the faint flecks of silver in his beard, the calm way he held her gaze. "You'll mend the boys' boots tomorrow," he said, voice soft. She nodded. "They do like that." She wanted to say more, about the days getting longer, about how she'd stopped counting them since Thomas passed. But the words caught. He reached for his coat. "Night, Mar." "Good night, Silas." She watched him walk out to the barn, back straight, steps slow in the snow. Later, she sat by the fire, staring at the photograph again. Thomas in his uniform, eyes fixed somewhere past her. He had been a good man, strong, but his silence had been different, distant, walls thick with grief and pride. Silas's quiet was something else. Like HED made peace with being broken, and didn't mind if she saw the cracks. In bed, she listened to the wind push against the house. The boys breathed steady on their pallets. A loose board tapped softly against the wall. She didn't sleep for a long time. The next morning, a hawk circled above the fields, its cry sharp and lonely. Mara watched it from the porch, arms crossed against the cold. The boys were still asleep, and the fire inside was burning low. She let it. The chill helped her think. Silas came around the corner with a pail of water. His coat was dusted with snow. He didn't speak, just nodded once and set the pail down by the door. His quiet had settled into the rhythm of the place. Not heavy, not strange. Just there, like the creak of the roof beams or the sound of the wind skimming the hill. "You sleep all right?" she asked. He gave a one-shouldered shrug. "Hard not to when the barn don't leak." She cracked the smallest smile. "You fixed that too, didn't you?" Didn't seem right to leave it. They stood together in silence, the way people do when there's nothing urgent pressing but still something unspoken hanging in the cold between them. After breakfast, Silas took the boys out to check the stream. The ice had pulled back just enough in places for the water to show its teeth. Mara stood in the doorway and watched as Eli slipped and Silas caught him by the coat. Samuel crouched low, studying the water like it held secrets. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been holding her breath until she saw them laughing. Later, while they all worked in the shed, hammering boards into place for a proper pen, she brought out bread she'd made from the last of the flour. Flat, a little burnt, but hot. She handed a piece to Silas. Their fingers brushed. He met her eyes but didn't speak. That evening, Mara stood in the doorway of the boys' room, listening to their breathing. They were sleeping deeper now, eating better, talking more. She stepped outside. The night air was sharp, but she welcomed it, needed it to clear the fog in her chest. The stars were out, clear and brutal. The kind of sky that reminded you how small you really were. Silas joined her a minute later. His boots crunched lightly in the snow, but she didn't turn. He stood a few feet off, staring out at the dark line of trees beyond the field. "They trust you," she said. He gave a slow nod. "I don't take that lightly." She turned to face him. "You planning on leaving come spring?" "I was," he said. Then added, "But I don't know now." She waited. "It's strange," he went on, "how a place that ain't yours can start to feel like it might be. Not because of what's here, but because of what could be." Mara looked down at her hands, clasped in front of her. Her fingers were raw again. The skin cracked where the wind had kissed them too often, but they were strong hands, still working, still shaping the world in small, stubborn ways. "I don't need a man to rescue me," she said, voice steady. "I know that," Silas said. "You're still standing. That tells me all I need to know." A quiet passed between them, not heavy, not empty, just real. He looked toward the house. "That boy of yours, IHES smart. Got a sharp eye." "HES his father's boy," she said. Silas turned back to her. "No. HES yours." For the first time in months, her throat tightened, not from grief, but something warmer. Something that scared her in a different way. She didn't answer, just nodded once and went back inside. The wind pushed gently against the door before she closed it. The next week brought news. A rider came down from the north, heavy coat crusted with salt and snow. He brought word of land claims opening up farther west, and with it, rumors of railroad men sniffing around. Mara stood by the well listening as the man spoke to Silas, his voice quick and sure, like he already had one foot back on the trail. "You've got good hands," the man told Silas. "There's work out there for men who can keep things standing. Decent pay, too." Mara kept her face still, her hands wrapped around the rope bucket. Silas didn't give much back, just asked where, how far, and when. When the rider left, Silas stood in the yard for a long while, the sun catching in his beard. She didn't call to him, didn't ask. That night, while the boys drew pictures in the ash with sticks, Mara mended a sleeve. Silas watched the fire. The room felt tighter than usual, like the air itself had shifted. "You thinking of going?" she asked finally, not looking up from her stitching. He waited a beat too long before answering. "I don't know. You said you had family. They're gone. What would you be chasing then?" He rubbed a hand over his mouth. "A place. Maybe something like a start." "I don't know." She tied off her thread. "There's work here." He looked over at her. "Is that you asking me to stay?" Her hands still. "No," she said quietly. "It's me saying you don't have to go if what you're looking for might already be here." The room held its breath. Samuel yawned. Eli scratched his name into the soot. "I've run from a lot of places," Silas said after a moment. "Buried my wife with my own hands and kept moving after. I don't scare easy. But staying in one place again, letting something matter, that's a different kind of fear." She folded the shirt and set it aside. "We all carry something." Silas nodded. "You carry it well." That night Markel didn't sleep. She stared at the low ceiling above her bed, fingers laced across her chest. She remembered Thomas last winter, how his strength had faded in silence, how HED said nothing, even when the pain had taken his voice. She had never blamed him. HED done what he could. But even then, she'd known the next part of her life would be built with her own two hands. She didn't want to build it alone anymore, but she would if she had to. The next morning, the boys were up early, wrestling over a scarf. The sky had shifted, clouds parting just enough to let sun strike the crusted snow. The whole world glittered, hardened clean. Silas was at the barn already, splitting wood. His coat was off, sleeves rolled. She watched him from the doorway. He worked slow, methodical, like he was thinking. She walked out to him, pulling her shawl tight. He looked up as she neared. "I'm not asking you to stay for me," she said. "I know. him asking what kind of man leaves a place that finally gave him peace. He exhaled. The axe hung at his side. He'd stay for the right reasons. Then you'd better know what they are. He nodded once. I think I do. They stood there, the air still and biting. No promises spoken. None needed. Inside, the boys' laughter broke across the snow. The world had not softened, but it had opened. Just a little. The thaw came slow, like a secret unfolding. First the drip from the eave, then the dark slits in the snowbanks where earth peeked through. The trees creaked louder in the mornings, like they were stretching after a long sleep. The air still held its edge, but the wind had shifted, less cruel now, more like breath. Mara felt it in her bones, in the weight of the chores now shared, in the way Ella's cheeks pink ed up with play instead of fever, in the sound of Samuel's boots running down the path to the barn. She felt it in herself, too. She didn't startle at every sound now, didn't wake in the dark reaching for what was gone. Silas stayed. No declaration, no drawn minus out talk. He just kept showing up each day, fixing what needed fixing, teaching the boys, eating quietly beside them. He never tried to take anything over, never made himself big. He just filled the spaces that had once felt hollow. One morning, she caught him teaching Samuel how to sharpen a blade. The boy's tongue stuck out in concentration. Silas leaned close, murmuring patient words. She stood at the doorway and didn't interrupt. Later that day, while Mara dug in the frozen garden bed, trying to loosen soil that hadn't felt sun in months, she heard footsteps behind her. Not rushed, not careful, just present. Silas held out a tin box. She wiped her hands and took it, opening the rusted lid. Inside were seeds. Not many, but enough. Corn, beans, squash. A few flower seeds, 2 wild things. Nothing fancy. Traded the last of my tobacco for them, he said. Figured you might make better use of it. She didn't speak right away. Just pressed a thumb into the little paper packets. I don't have much else to offer, he added. She closed the lid and looked at him. You gave up something that made you feel like home. That's not nothing. They stood in the dirt, the weak sun on their faces. I could build a second room, he said. Give you and the boys more space. You don't have to. I want to. She watched him, the way he didn't flinch under her eyes. Then let's build it. That afternoon they started. He drew out the plan with a stick in the dirt. She pointed out where the wind hit hardest, where the sun fell best in late spring. They argued, briefly, over the angle of the roof. He smiled when she proved him wrong. The boys watched, puzzled at first, then excited. Eli fetched nails. Samuel dragged a board twice his size. The hammering echoed down the slope, a sound not of survival, but of making something meant to last. One night, after the frame was up, they sat by the fire again. The boys were asleep, and the house smelled of sawdust and stew. Silas sat with his hands open in his lap, like he was ready for whatever came next. I never thought I'd build anything again, he said. Not after losing them. Mara didn't reply. She knew what that kind of loss did. How it stripped your voice and your reason. How it made the days flat and endless. You don't have to be afraid to try again, she said. He nodded, eyes fixed on the fire. It's not the building that scares me. It's the keeping. Her voice softened. Then don't try to keep it like something fragile. Keep it like something alive. Outside, the wind had quieted. The stars were out again, and the moonlight lay gentle across the fields. There were still wolves in the hills, still frost in the ground, but there was something else now, too. Warmth, not just from the fire, not just from another body in the room, but from the choice to stay. Spring broke open without permission. The creek ran high, snapping twigs and swallowing branches. The thaw pulled color from the land again, browns, then greens, then the bright shimmer of new things pushing up from the dirt. The earth smelled like wet bark and old roots, and for the first time in a long while, Mara didn't dread what came next. The boys ran longer each day, their faces flushed with sun and dirt. Eli climbed trees he'd once been too small for. Samuel followed behind Silas like a shadow, learning how to handle a blade, how to listen for changes in wind, how to spot where the fence had come loose. They were growing into men. Mara saw it, felt it deep in her chest, half pride, half ache. The second room was finished before the end of April. Nothing fancy, but strong. Silas had carved a small notch into the doorway. April, year of new things. She didn't ask what year he meant, his or hers, maybe both. They moved the boys into the new room and left the old space quiet for a while. That night Mara lay awake, the bed beside her empty, but the house full of breath and warmth. She heard Eli turn in his sleep, heard Silas shift once on the cot in the main room. It was enough. The next morning, trouble came. A wagon from town, carrying a name she hadn't heard in years. Willard Crane. Thomas' cousin. Blood barely. Trouble, certainly. He came with paper and a bitter mouth. Said he had claim to the land. Said Thomas had promised him rights before dying. Said her name meant little unless she had the deed in her hands. She didn't. They had burned with half their records in the chimney fire 2 winters back. Silas stepped up before she could speak. "You're not taking anything from this woman," Willard sneered. "And who are you? Her hired hand?" "I'm the one who's been breaking his back helping raise her boys and keep this land alive. So maybe you think again before you come with threats." Willard stepped off the wagon, puffed minus up and full of himself. "You've got no say in this. This is family business." Mara's voice cut through the air, low and firm. "You never cared about family. You never once came to check on us. Not even when Thomas died." Willard shrugged. "Lost my place then. Is now. You're not getting this land. Well, see." He tipped his hat and left, but his words stuck like burrs in a coat. That night, Mara sat at the table, staring at the old ledger Thomas had kept. No deed, just scribbled notes. Crop yields. Weather. A prayer once, written shaky and crooked on the last page. Silas poured her coffee, sat down across from her. "You think HES serious?" he asked. She nodded. HES got just enough of the law and just enough hate to be dangerous. "We can fight him. I don't have the money for court, or the strength for drawing minus outlaws." He looked at her, steady. "Then we do it another way. Hell, we show this town who you are. We show them what's been built here, and who's been building it." Mara looked down at her hands. "Still cracked. Still strong. I don't like owing anyone." "You won't. You'll just be seeing." The next few days, Silas rode into town, spoke with the clerk, dug through records, talked with neighbors who still remembered Thomas hauling wood after the flood, who remembered Mara walking miles for medicine when no one else could get through. People who owed nothing, but remembered everything. A week later, Willard returned. But this time he found the sheriff waiting with a letter from the county office. No claim, no case, no proof. He spat in the dirt, glared at Mara, then climbed back onto his wagon and rode off. When he was gone, Mara stood in the doorway, hands on her hips. Silas stood beside her, quiet. She didn't thank him, not with words. She just leaned her shoulder against his, and they watched the road stay empty together. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep in the new room, Silas didn't take the cup. He stayed in the kitchen, waiting. Mara lit the lamp, poured 2 cups, and sat across from him. "You fought for us," she said. "I didn't know how not to. I've known nothing but fighting since the day we got here." He looked at her, eyes soft. "Maybe it's time to build something instead." She reached across the table, her hand over his. "We already are." Outside, the wind shifted again, warmer now, filled with the scent of pine and the soft rustle of green things waking up. Summer came slow, but when it did, it settled deep into the soil. The land softened, turned rich and dark beneath their hands. The garden came up in neat rows, beans reaching, squash flowering, corn thickening, its stalks like it had a mind to last. Even the hens started laying more. Life, stubborn and steady, pushed its way back into the bones of the place. Mara worked like she always had, but now the weight on her shoulders was so sharp. She still rose early, still chopped wood, still ran the house with tight corners and clean hands, but her silence had ease. Her laughter came in pieces, quiet but there. The kind that crept out in the middle of a shared chore, or when Samuel told a story too big for his mouth and Eli tried to act grown when he was only halfway there. Silas stayed. By now, he had a drawer in the kitchen, a spot by the back door for his boots, his own mug, chipped but his. He didn't call himself anything, didn't press for names or titles, but the boys started calling him Sir without being told. And when Eli fell and split his lip open on a stone, it was Silas who carried him in, his hands shaking worse than Mara's. Shed cleaned the wound, stitched it with thread boiled twice. When it was done, Silas sat on the porch, elbows on his knees, staring hard at nothing. "Hes all right," Shed said, leaning against the post beside him. "I know. I didn't expect to feel it like that." Mara nodded. "That's the cost." He looked over at her. "Of letting someone matter." Hed swallowed hard, then nodded, like he understood something he hadn't before. July burned hot and bright. The fields gave off steam by noon. Mara started hanging laundry at dawn to keep ahead of the heat. Silas built a second clothesline without being asked, and the boys strung it with wire and laughter. One night after supper, they walked down to the creek as a family. The boys stripped to their drawers and splashed like pups, shouting into the gold light. Mara stood on the bank, arms crossed, letting her skirt hem catch the breeze. Silas stepped beside her. "They'll remember this." She nodded. "They better." He was quiet a moment. "So will I." She looked at him. He wasn't a man of big gestures or pretty words, but the way he watched her steady, sure that said enough. When the sun dropped low, and the boy's word rang off on a flat rock, Silas reached into his coat and pulled something small from his pocket. "A ring. Not fancy. No gem. Just a thin band, worn smooth. My mother's," he said. "She gave it to me the day I left home. Told me to give it to the person who made me stop running." Mara stared at it, then at him. "I'm not asking for anything you don't want," he said. "You don't have to say yes tonight, or ever. But I need you to know this is where I want to be." She didn't take it, not yet. But she didn't turn away either. Later, after the boys were asleep, she sat at the table alone, turning the ring in her palm. It was warm from his hand. Simple, honest. She thought of Thomas, of the way grief had nearly turned her to stone, of how long it had taken to come back to herself, to believe in after. She slipped the ring onto her finger, not as a promise of what had been, but a choice, quiet and clear. The next morning, she found Silas splitting wood behind the barn, shirt damp with sweat, eyes bright with surprise when he saw her. She held up her hand. "That a yes?" he asked, voice rough. "That's a well see," she said, smiling for real this time. He grinned. "You'll take it." The wind carried the scent of clover. The house behind them stood strong. The future waited, full of work and children and long seasons. But it no longer felt like a thing to be endured. It felt like something to build. Another dawn waits ahead. Subscribe to see it.